Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Ruck, your weekly rugby breakdown with me, John Ferguson. And it is so good to be back. It has only been 8 days, but with the rolling on of the rugby that it has been, it's been a smorgasbord. It really has. You had the Lions, you had the Fiji test, you had the Rugby Championship. The punches just never stopped coming. The games never stopped coming, and it was awesome to be in the middle of it. But I managed to take a hiatus. But I am so happy to be back, and I'm joined once again by Lockie. Lockie, you've got a fresh cut since I've seen you last. We've shared some pleasantries about how life's going. It's really nice to see you, mate. Welcome back.
Thank you, and likewise, it's a bit of a home job. So the al dente mullet is slowly finding a bit of taste. I'm not sure how it's going down with the wife, but we'll find out in due course, mate.
Mate, I'm sure it's working an absolute treat, and you have to shut the door just before we started recording to keep her away from you. But it has been a interesting time in rugby because usually you and I are doing reviews, previews, etc. But today we are really going to get into the nuts and bolts of the news that are happening in and around rugby, particularly here in Australia, but also abroad as well. And it is super exciting because you and I haven't actually gotten an opportunity to talk about a lot of news in a while. So I'm keen to get into the really nitty gritty parts of it and really break down some of the things that have been happening. And we will be talking about Carter Gordon, Wallabies Squad, Australia A Squad, Wallaroos funding, Sevens as well with Lockie. And I think there's another couple of things that we can tack on there as well for good measure. And guys, just before we head into all that and more with Lockie, don't forget to like and subscribe right here on Off the Ruck. It really, really helps me to give me a thumbs up down there in the description and also to comment because I will reply in the comments to you guys. I want to hear what you guys think about the Australia A squad, the Wallaby squad, the Carter Gordon transfer, Wallaroos funding, and the state of the game as well, and how you're feeling about the Northern Tour. Because today's not actually all about previewing the Northern Tour. It is very much about encapsulating the news that's happening at the moment, and we'll do another preview for the Northern Tour a little bit further on down in the road. But Lockie, what do you say? We should just get straight into it.
Let's rip in, Fergo.
All right, well, Lockie, we're going to start with the previously touted golden boy of Australian rugby, Carter Gordon, making his return to the Australian rugby landscape from his one little stint over there in rugby league with the Gold Coast Titans. Played one game, making his return making his debut for the Titans in the NRL in their last regular season game there. And then he actually was out all year with a spinal fluid leak. Very unusual injury. Does not appear that like it will reoccur or anything like that. So it's not something that we need to be worried about. What is your first reactions to this signing news from a rugby perspective? Kind of, because obviously he's going to the Queensland Reds, but he's also been signed by Australian rugby through to 2028, I believe. So what was your initial reaction to the signing?
It's an interesting one, this, isn't it, Fergo? Because it feels like Australian rugby's worst kept secret. It's been floating around for at least a couple of months. So, Willie won't he? We think he's coming back. He's always had that Queensland tie as a Sunny Coast boy. And as a Queensland pathway product, played Hospital Cup or Prem Grade with West Bulldogs here in Brisbane, and was picked up very early doors by the Melbourne Rebels during their tenure and racked up 46 games for them. So he's no slouch. He's played over 50 first class games, including 8 tests for the Wallabies, but it just adds more confusion to me about the playmaking stocks, and I'm really interested to peel this apart with you because not only does there now create a logjam of relatively inexperienced fly halves at Wallaby level, but also at Queensland. So I'm really interested to get your take on what still seems to be a fairly hefty signing. It's been confirmed that there was an agreement reached between Rugby Australia and the NRL, an undisclosed come formally, but the reported sum is around $100,000, and Carter Gordon on a 650 contract reported at the Titans, apparently down to around $500,000 a year, as reported by some outlets. So it's still big money for a player that is relatively untested in the international circuit. Didn't get much of an opportunity, but I'm sure you've got plenty of thoughts on this one for me, Fergo.
Yeah, if we can just start there with the signing news, I think that the Titans carried, several tens of thousands of dollars of medical bills trying to treat Carter Gordon during his time there. So I think that's probably where that sum has arrived at. They want to get that money paid back and then some for letting him go early. And I think if you're looking at this purely as a contractual negotiation, whether it's a rugby player or not, this feels like a pretty stock standard amount for what they've had to cover, as well as a break fee. If you're looking at the amounts they were looking to pay Carter Gordon at the Titans per season. So I think that from an objective perspective, I think this is actually a pretty good deal from Australian rugby from that aspect. But they've also not broken the bank to be able to get Carter Gordon. And that was also the case for when they said goodbye to Noah Lolesio and not wanting to pay overs for him as well, and which allowed him to go to Japan. And so it's quite interesting that in previous seasons where Noah Lolesio has been thrown to the side and Carter Gordon was very much thrust into the limelight and as the key man of the Wallabies, they haven't really distinguished between those two in remuneration so much, even though Lolesio has been in the game of rugby. So I do think that it's very interesting from that perspective about what the raw numbers say about the optics of Carter Gordon's talent, because it sounds like they've roughly offered Noah Lolesio the same thing that they would have offered Carter Gordon. So it is quite interesting that that is where that kind of playmaking stock is at. And as you mentioned, they're very raw. I think what's interesting is you mentioned the logjam at the Reds, and I'd like you to touch on that because I think that although he has been picked for the Wallabies, and we will get in the Wallabies squad in just a moment, the logjam at the Reds, how do you actually see that panning out? Because they've got four, and I'm sure you will go through them, that roughly all signed on the books. But honestly, that can very quickly dwindle down to two. And I think for an optics perspective, the Reds aren't as stacked as it may seem. Maybe you see it differently.
Yeah, well, it's a funny one, isn't it? And to talk about the logjam, you got to talk about the logs, right? So you've got Carter Gordon added into the mix now on a 3-year deal that sees him linked through to the end of 2028, as you mentioned. You've still got Tom Liner and Harry McLaughlin-Phillips under contract through the end of 2026 with Queensland. Throw in some very strong reports out of Code Sports that Fijian international Ben Volavola has signed with the Reds as well. So you've got 4 quality halves, 3 test fly halves, and the incumbent Australia A fly half who's played AUNZ against the Lions, who is touted as one of the next big things a few years back in Harry McLaughlin-Phillips. So it makes it interesting, and we'll see how quickly you can run through players. The Waratahs last year under Darren Coleman is probably the best case example of how quickly you can churn through one position and burn out, in his case, the front row. But I think 3 as a key playmaker in one position is probably maximum. So it makes it really interesting around who the 4th is and who looks out of those 4 set to play a lot of club. Now, the signing of Ben Volavola is not confirmed. It's been strongly insinuated. I think one of them, whether it's this year or in the immediate future, will get squeezed out or will look elsewhere, just because you're all playing to play Super Rugby Pacific. You're not getting it as a 4th stringer. It just will not happen. So it makes it really interesting, particularly with Liner and Harry McLaughlin-Phillips coming off contract at the end of 2026. I'm not sure of the reports around Volavola, but I think it's a 1-year deal as well. So it keeps things pretty tight. Well. But you've got to remember as well, Fergo, the Carter Gordon news was a surprise to Les Kiss as well, the Reds coach. We had the chance to speak to him on Monday here in Brisbane, and he said it was between 4 and 5 days from when it first came to their attention that he could be a Red and him being signed in a Reds jersey doing the shoots at Ballymore. So that is a rapid turnaround and a really interesting puzzle piece to add. There's a certain irony given Mason Gordon's injury has been shortened and now effectively extinguished as a result of his multiple concussions. Now his older brother gets the chance to come back and play for his boyhood club that he always dreamed of representing. So it's an interesting situation that's starting to build there, but perhaps you see it differently and perhaps there is room for 4.
I think that more so on your point about where Carter Gordon has ended up. There was no query about where he was going to end up. He always wanted to be in Queensland. He probably would have stayed in rugby had he been offered a decent deal to go back to the Reds at the time with the Rebels folding. Obviously, he was bearing some baggage from the Rugby World Cup plus the Rebels folding, but it was very public knowledge that he wanted to return to Queensland because that's where he's from, and that just wasn't on the cards at the time of the Rebels folded and he decided to go to the Titans. So now he's at the Reds where he probably should have, could have ended up, a year, 18 months ago, etc. But I think that at the Reds, you really have to look at where Tom Liner is because he got managed a lot this year. He played a lot of games in Super Rugby Pacific and then copped a lot of concussions. He copped a couple of concussions throughout the year and niggling injury, hamstring injury, and ultimately wasn't decided as much. And then you had to play Harry McLaughlin-Phillips, who was a complete newbie at this level. And so I just think that putting Carter Gordon into that mix, all of a sudden you've got a genuine starter that's comfortable at Super Rugby level that you can call on to start, and then the other two, and then possibly Ben Volavola fighting it out. And honestly, I think Harry McLaughlin Phillips, along with Jack Bowen, they are so young, and this is where Super Rugby needs to get their detail right. Those guys need to be playing off the bench and they need to be playing club rugby and they still need to be developing because they are so young. It's not that they can't play at this level, but you shouldn't need to churn and burn and rush these kind of players through Super Rugby. If you're playing Super Rugby, you are vying for, as starting in a Super Rugby jersey, you are vying for a Wallaby spot. So if you're Harry McLaughlin Phillips or Jack Bowen, you shouldn't necessarily be starting most Super Rugby games because you are so far away from being Wallabies level. And I just think and I know that Harry McLaughlin Phillips has now been drafted into Australia A, but that's because Declan Meredith has pulled out with injury late. And so you don't need to have these 21, 22, verging on 23-year-olds coming into the Wallabies setup and being given that opportunity because the Super Rugby Pacific competition is so short. So you want to be dedicating those starting minutes and those bench minutes to players in their mid 20s that are 23 upwards of mid 20s and really be nailing their craft to then be able to be ready to go on to test because that's the only step that we have going up to test. So I don't think that Harry McLaughlin Phillips is a poor player by any stretch, but it's just why rush his development when you've got all these talented players around him, and he'll learn heaps from someone like Carter Gordon and a Ben Volavola should he end up at the Reds. But specifically on Carter Gordon, what do you think Carter Gordon can bring to the Reds and the Wallabies now that he's making his return?
This one's fascinating for me because you've got a bloke who has played so little footy over the past 18 months as well that we don't really have a read. He wasn't considered a fly half or a playmaking option at the Titans. They were determined to use him as a centre in the very limited minutes that he was able to put on the park and primarily used as a centre through Tweed Seagulls in their Queensland Cup, so that second tier beneath the NRL. Some of the highlights when he first got into it, playing that second tier of NRL, his passing game is still so slick. He rips big cutouts. He's a big physical presence in the fly half role. It's something that Kiss was particularly strong on emphasizing, that he is physical and can be up to the rigors required of the traffic sent in your direction in that jersey. And I thought that was really interesting given how much criticism can be thrown Tom Liner's way for being really tough but injury prone and has battled to stay on the park. So I think that durability and that physicality is something that really excites Australian and Queensland fans in particular, combined with that triple threat, that kick pass run. He's just had such limited opportunities in the test arena being well supported. But for someone who's got a pretty poor first class record, I think he's 14 wins and 32 losses across his Rebels and Australia career. And that's also reflective of those two teams at the time.
Yeah.
But like he has some incredible highlights, and those who were lucky enough to sort of see him live probably saw how dynamically he moves across the park. And I loved the tit for tat that was going on between him and Noah Lucio through those last few years. It was excellent. It added a lot of fuel to the fire, and he's an exciting prospect. But I have so many questions about the putting all the eggs in this basket now that he's straight into a spring tour squad as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think you have to just say this is not where the Wallabies again want to be with their number 10. You do not want to be bringing a guy back who's played one game of rugby league professionally and then, no games of rugby union in more than 18 months. And then all of a sudden you're chucking him in and a guy who started 3 tests as your Northern Tour fly halves. This is as far from ideal as you can almost get. Like, let's be really blunt about that. This is not where you want to be. And I think we will just go straight to the Wallabies squad because we have been dancing around it now, and we can circle back on some other minute details later. But that, like, they are the only two playmakers, Carter Gordon and Tane Edmed, less than, like, I'd say 15 tests combined. Fewer of those have been started. And then you've got Hunter Paisami and Hamish Stewart talked about as possible 10 replacements should they be needed before Joe Schmidt can call on someone like James O'Connor. Because he'll be in Leicester. He's at Leicester Tigers, and then he's in the UK. He'll be really close and proximal should they need him. But yeah, it's not ideal, is it here, Lockie?
No, and you got to bear in mind, it's not just the fact that they've got a combined, 11 or 12 tests. It's Carter Gordon hasn't played since the 23 World Cup. He's only started 5 of his 8 tests, and he's only played a full 80 twice. So this is by no means a known quantity that slots straight back in, and you say, well, this is all hunky-dory, he'll be sweet. Geez, he was pulled after 50 in that game against Fiji because he was cracking under pressure. He didn't get a run against Portugal. He got pulled off came off the bench against Wales, and Ben Donaldson, who now isn't even in the Australia Wallabies squad, doesn't get a look in. It's just this mismatch of playmaking options. But you're right. I think particularly the fly halves and then by extension the halves pairings are really exciting to sink our teeth into for this squad.
Yeah, and we'll go straight away there. So, possible debutant uncapped player Kalani Thomas from the Reds has made his way in, perhaps fortuitously with the run of injuries and the kind of selection that's happened around. The Tate McDermott's now out for a long while. We're thinking a good few months before he's back on the training paddock, being able to really get back up to speed. And then obviously Nick White's retired. And then that kind of leaves us at where are we at right now? There's other players like Henry Robertson at the Force, who is in the Australia A squad. There are players like Teddy Wilson as well, who is an up and coming player. But Kalani Thomas is one of the most experienced players that we have, actually, surprisingly, outside Lonergan and Jake Gordon. And so that's really exciting. But then you've got Ryan Lonergan and Jake Gordon paired along with these two halves. I think that all these players are actually good footballers. It just depends whether they can run a game and command a team at the pace and frenetic energy that a test match has. And that's what we're going to see. And I think someone who's really going to not make or break, but I think we're really going to be able to see sink into his role is Ryan Lonergan. I think that he probably was so thankful at being in the Wallabies finally that he kind of, fumbled a couple of balls, maybe wasn't as aggressive as he usually is at the breakdown, maybe not afforded the protection that he needed to have at the breakdown. But I think, honestly, with his skill set plus his ability to goal kick, I think we're going to see a very, very strong presence of Ryan Lonergan in this end of year tour. And I think he's actually experienced enough to, although he doesn't have a lot of test caps, to be able to settle himself in the starting test side, should Joe Schmidt deem that to be the right course of action.
Yeah, the Lonergan piece is curious when you consider the combination that's starting to form with Edmed, and that will be a club partnership moving into next year. Obviously, the Wallabies jersey is not the place to hone your Brumbies combinations. That's not what we're suggesting, but there are starting to be little threads that you can piece together. Gordon's obviously the fly in the ointment in that he has no existing combinations with any of these players. I think his last halfback, oh my goodness, would have been Ryan Lowrens at the Rebels. So it's been a long sort of break between drinks, and no Tate McDermott, no Nick White shows a lack of familiarity with a halfback. That lends itself to Ryan Lonergan potentially having, as you suggested, the front foot in, maybe with Tane Edmed, but then Thomas with 50 plus super caps. He had 3 cracks against the Lions in the recent tour of Australia with the Reds, AUNZ, and First Nations. He's handy. He's handy, and he may be there fortuitously. And I don't think he's there as a genuine option, but he will be the injury cover. And I think if he gets a chance, it could come against an Italy or towards the back end of the tour. And I think he might surprise some people. He's waited a long time behind Tate McDermott as the heir apparent there. And he's a handy footballer. I'll give him that.
Yeah, I mean, very much like for like. He has a very similar skill set to what Take McDermott has. So I don't think Joe Schmidt loses all that much. Although it's very hard to replace someone like Take McDermott because he is electric when he gets going. I think then we're also going to look at what Carter Gordon's game brings to the Wallabies, and I think that in Eddie Jones's positionalist structureless rugby that he had him playing, a young player like Carter Gordon was probably exposed to a lot of the harsh realities of how fast Test rugby is played and how small the margins are allowed actually there for error. And I think now moving into what Joe Schmidt has, philosophically, they're quite similar, Joneses and Schmidt, in the positionless rugby because we have a lot of forwards ball playing. We have a lot of backs doing small hands. It's not a whole lot of like, really, really structured play. It is pattern, 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 pattern. And then everyone is involved to be able to get to width when you find that. And I think that one thing the Wallabies have been struggling with is getting it to width. And now Carter Gordon can absolutely throw some of those looping long passes that James O'Connor has been getting so much success out of onto the wing. So I think, like you've mentioned, his passing game is absolutely elite, and he has the best pass in Australian rugby, and I can say that now as well. He's extremely good tackler. Where he falls down is his goal kicking, his kicking in general play, and I think also we haven't really seen him play with a full structure yet. So that remains to be seen and how he deals with that. But goal kicking, if he's going to be goal kicking, Sam Bruce on the ESP Scrum Reset podcast had his numbers at 67 or 69% in his last 2024 goal kicking efforts for the Melbourne Rebels. And I think they've chatted also about Joseph Akuso Suoli, who kicked 72% for the Roosters in 2024. So that's not where you want to be at. But I'd be interested to know what Ryan Lonergan's numbers are because he is a goal kicker and I think that he can knock him over for close to 50. So I think that he's someone that could be very interesting in that mix should Carter Gordon get a start. But I think in the lieu of that, it will probably go to Tane Edmed. But that's how I see that Carter Gordon fits into that Australian mold. I think he will really enjoy playing this direct rugby with Joe Schmidt, but I think that his ability to pass so long will definitely feed into opening up the field and finally giving our outer backs some more ball because they have been kind of neglected, really.
It's an interesting case study between Carter Gordon and Tom Liner insofar as Tom Liner had that incumbency before his injury, incumbent through the Lions series, heading back into Argentina before he had his hamstring complaint. So it's a very kick heavy game and a kick focus that Liner brings as opposed to Gordon's pass and run. And stylistically, I think Gordon will end up being paired with, out of necessity, with Gordon, who's a long boot, and Lonergan, who's a similarly long boot. And maybe it affords Gordon that opportunity to chance his arm a little more. And we're not saying, throw stupid balls, throw cutouts, have your way in a Wallabies jersey. But it adds a different kind of threat to Liner, and it's an interesting thing to have, particularly in these first 2 weeks outside of Reg 9 before James O'Connor comes into consideration. And I think there'll be a lot of interest and excitement in putting Carter Gordon where possible in next to Hunter Paisami as well, just to see and try and test some of these things. Remember, these are both West Bulldogs players out of the clubland scene in Brisbane as well. So there are some existing combinations that can be drawn upon. So it's just fascinating, right? And I was having a look at the fly halves in general before. I know we've got to stop harping on about it, but it is so interesting. so few of our fly halves have a winning record in general, like at club level or at international level. Ben Donaldson sitting on about a 42% in first class rugby, and a lot of that's propped up by early Waratahs wins. Tom Liner's exactly 50-50. Tane Edmed sitting around 26%. And then you've got Carter Gordon, who was based out of the Rebels. So we don't have, outside of James O'Connor, we don't have an experienced 10 who wins as well, or even just a winning 10. The closest would be Noah Lolesio, who's
I
got
was
well
just about
over
to say
100
that. I
first class
reckon Nola
caps.
Lucio probably has the best winning percentage of any fly half in Australia going back to Foley circa 2019 or 2018.
I've
He,
got
I
Lolesio at 67% overall.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just, and like he's gone now, and it's just such a shame because I keep having these conversations with my mates in group chats, and I'm just like, I don't think people, you don't know what you have until you're gone, till it's gone. And people will say, like, oh, Noel Lucio, he didn't make any impact, yada, yada, yada. The results speak for themselves. And I'm sorry, but whether it's with the Brums or with the Wallabies, he's winning games, and he might not be Mr. Stephen Larkham, or no one has been so far, to be fair. I don't think that ever gets leveled, that disc gets leveled at anyone else. But it's just, I'm still such a staunch believer that 2027 it will be Carter Gordon now that he's back and Noel Lolesio, because those two are the only ones that have really, really been able to show anything at either level. And I honestly don't think you can say anything else about any other fly half. I honestly think that's where the Wallabies are going to be at. Lolesio might not wow you, but I tell you what, he's now mature enough to be able to run a team and run a structure, and Joe Schmidt trusts him to do that. And so that
Well,
has been a critique which has been leveled against Ben Donaldson, and I think that's why you'll find he's not in this Wallaby squad.
and just the cold hard numbers on Lolesio, I've just pulled them up. He's played 77 games for the Brumbies. He's won 55, and he started over 70 games of Super Rugby for the Brumbies. That is a very consistent record that he has there. Throw in 33 Australia caps, and his win record's about 46%. So he's won 14, lost 17, had two draws. Yeah, they're not bad numbers by any means. And yes, you obviously want a fly half that is your match winner, your X factor, or you want all these wonderful things that you see around the world. And you say, hey, why can't my fly half do that? This is a fly half that can win games, pure and simple. And he has so many detractors for a bloke with over 100 first class games and a positive win record. So I think he really is the forgotten man. And I think now looking at, with Tane Edmed and Carter Gordon, Ben Donaldson out of consideration, and we have no backup until James O'Connor's available, who is 35, there is this massive vacuum that has a distinctly Nola Lassea shaped feel to it.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And you know what? I cherish you, Lockie, because you got the numbers up, and that's what we're about here on the breakdown. We want to break stuff down, and who better to do that with than yourself, and to get the numbers out there. So thank you so much, because that adds deep context for a bunch of people that that have been detractors of Nola Lucia. But I think what we will do, we'll park the playmakers for a minute, and we'll go on to the rest of the squad. How does that sound?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, Lockie, we've been chatting a whole lot about the playmakers, and we've been talking about the backs for a little bit. Let's get into the piggies. Let's get into the boys that do the heavy lifting up front. In the propping department, it is, can't remember the last time I've seen a Wallabies list without James Slipper's name on it. And he has retired, and it's so sad to see Big Slips not on that list. But he has made the choice to go out on a historic note, and I'm so happy for him. And to replace him, we've brought in the 100 cap Super Rugby player, the one time All Black, and now Queensland Reds player, Aiden Ross, instead of James Slipper. So that is, you're not dropping a whole bunch of, you're not dropping off as much experience as you could be. Obviously, James Slipper has played 175 odd Super Rugby games plus 151 or two test matches. So that's a whole lot of experience that no one in the world can actually compete with. So that's you're never going to get a like for like. But I think Aiden Ross, being the age profile that he is, 28 years old, plus that experience, really good, along with Tom Robertson, as well as Zane Nongor, Alan Alatoa, Angus Bell, and Taniela Tupou. That is our propping stock. Not bad, not bad, Lockie, not bad at all.
Yeah, if you're going to try and replace slips, I think you've almost found the Kiwi version. Like they are more similar than I could have possibly anticipated. It's
Yeah.
this very down to earth, sort of rough and tumble bloke, really kind, hearts of gold. I'm really excited for Rossi to potentially have a crack, and I think he will. He spent enough time around the Wallabies setup after getting called into Reds and AUNZ to face the Lions, and he offers so much experience and scrummaging grunt up front. I mean, it's just. I think you've got to watch some of those Super Rugby Oz games, particularly to really appreciate just the kind of damage that he can do to less experienced scrummagers. Him playing in the Brisbane Premier Grade Final was just embarrassing. His stint for Bond University, it was horrible to watch because it was boys against men. So all that experience coming into the fold, I think he probably gets a debut against Japan. That's how it feels to me, as that loose head option behind Angus Bell, or maybe he even starts.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. I think that how do you want to use Angus Bell? What's the best part of Angus Bell? And I've been thinking about this a lot actually, because props from a scrummaging perspective don't reach their prime until late 20s, early 30s. That is universally known across the rugby landscape, particularly so at test level. But what Angus Bell is really good at is running the ball. And so I think that you don't necessarily want to use him to grind out a game. Yes, he brings impact. Yes, he brings running ability, and you might need that at the start. And the Wallabies have had notoriously slow starts in 2025. But I do think that having someone like Aiden Ross start actually allows Angus Bell to be the most impactful version of himself. And I do see that trend actually continuing, because you don't need to be running Angus Bell, because he can play at 80, he can play 70, and he has before, but you really don't need to be thrashing him for that long. And I think that he adds more off the bench or in the second 40 than he does in the first 40 when players are fresh. So it's going to be really exciting to see how he goes. Obviously, Tom Robertson there, not quite sure whether he's displayed to be able to be a true test weapon at tight head prop or loose head prop. But nonetheless, he's been good. He's been good at test level. Obviously, Zane Nongor playing in behind a very, very informed Alan Alatoa, making his way back from that pec injury or shoulder injury. And then we've got Taniela Tupou sticking around until the end of the year, and that's when he'll meet up with his French top 14 club, Racing 92. That is a good propping stock, and I'm more so worried on the loose head side, just because we don't know what Aiden Ross is like with this bunch of players. But on the tight head side, we've got it pretty sorted, at least 1 and 2 deep.
It feels like there's a pretty clear 1, 2, 3 on each side as well. Like, and whether you describe Bell as a starter or a finisher, he's still the number one loose head. I think now
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
Slits has gone. So I'm fascinated to see the makeup of that. It feels like Robertson and potentially Tupou will be on the outer, just with the knowledge that we only have Tupou for a limited amount of time, and Nongor's development is really important for the Wallabies at the moment. So perhaps we see a bit more of Zane Nongor than Taniela at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but you're right. I mean, 7A's has just been absolutely braining it before he was injured. Since he's come back, it's a wonderful return for us to have. So looking forward to many more minutes from him.
Yeah, some changes at the props, and then also more changes at hooker. No Brandon Painga'anuku. Matt Fesler comes straight in. Also playing for Australia A, but he's just been so lacking that game time because of his injuries. I believe it's a calf. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's been keeping him out, and so that's been a problem for him. And then now Josh Nasser really solidifies his spot as that second spot hooker, because Matt Fesler having to play both of them is still having to prove fitness and prove that he's at the level, because his one test that he played, he didn't look particularly sharp, unfortunately, and that kind of cost the Wallabies in some elements there. I believe that was was that against Fiji? Was that how long ago it was?
I think Matty Fazler came back in the first test against the Lions.
Okay.
And that was a tough game for him.
Yeah.
To be honest, we didn't see him again through the series, so injury
Yeah.
definitely playing its part. But interesting, the BPA angle that you led with.
Mm,
I haven't seen anywhere that he's been injured. So
mm.
to see him omitted from a Wallaby squad and then not in the Australia A squad that we'll touch on later was a big surprise to me.
Yeah, and from I've heard nothing. This is not male. I think that you kind of take a approach of what kind of hookers are we looking to play with, and set piece needs to be key, and that's throwing, and but also you need to be mobile, active, and involved. And I think looking at Matt Fesler, Josh Nasser, and Billy Pollard's probably the fastest and the most explosive out of those two, but the other two are absolute workhorses. And I think Brandon Paingamosa is more of a strength, impact, and scrummaging hooker. And I think that's where we see Brandon Paingamosa really being the outlier here of those three hookers that have been selected. He's definitely not as quick as these other three. So I think that's where we've seen Brandon Paingamosa depart stylistically from these other hookers. I'm not sure of what their throwing accuracy is, but I know that Matt Fesler, when he was on song last year before the run of injuries, he was absolutely dynamite throwing for us. Josh Nasser hasn't played as many games, obviously, because he's been behind. He's been injured and also behind Richie Asiata this year, as well as Matt Fesler the previous year. And we know that Billy Pollard had a pretty decent year at the Brumbies, although has been struggling at the Wallabies. So that's something that Tom Donnelly and John Alugia really want to nail the new Wallabies coaching staff in the forwards. They really want to make sure that that's sharpened up, and that includes a big lift and a big improve from the second row of the Wallabies. Why don't you take us through the second row there, Lockie?
Yeah, some interesting options in the second row that have been picked up. I think, Nick Frost writes himself in at this point as the option there. Lukan Salakaia-Loto retained as well as a big one for me. Then you've also got Jeremy Williams, and the interesting one there is Josh Canham, that's set to play for Australia A and then stay on with the Wallabies. So
Yep.
interesting because of the depth in that Australia A locking stock, which we will touch on later. But Canham to me seemed like the surprise selection to be elevated and come along with that. Were you expecting to see Canham in the mix there?
I don't know if I was expecting him, but I didn't see who else was going to jump up. It was more so because I wasn't overly convinced with Darcy Swain. I think he had a better Super Rugby campaign than he did Super Rugby Oz, and so that kind of recency bias just didn't make me jump to his name straight away. And we'll get into some more selections about who could have been in the Oz A tour as opposed to not a little bit later. But what I think that Josh Canham has is a high work rate, and we know that he has the bulk and the grunt to be effective in contact. He's just working on the finer details to be able to do that because we know he has the game in the loose, and it's just that youthful energy that he brings to the game, which is so exciting at Super Rugby level, but can land you in quite a bit of hot water at test level when you're versing those bigger bodies. So I think that's a great development player to have. He definitely has a mentality for test rugby, but it's just whether, as in like his fortitude and his mental strength. I just think that he's got a bit of a youthful game management style at the moment about his position, particularly at the line out. And that's where I see the strength in this Wallabies squad list is that the line out can all of a sudden become a point of difference with Lukan Salakaia-Loto starting because I can't see it any other way than Lukan Salakaia-Loto starting because we've seen time and time again Jeremy Williams and Nick Frost on the field together for an extended period of time, they are too light and they lack punch as a duo to genuinely be able to compete with the likes of All Blacks, Argentina, and South Africa in the Rugby Championship. And I think I'd stretch that as far in saying as anyone above Australia, that's not the combo that you want to be running. Maybe you run that against the first half against Japan because they're not as heavy a pack. But I genuinely believe that Lukan Salakaia-Loto is such a crucial member of this second row for his line-out prowess. And as you and I have mentioned several times, he's the most experienced lock in Australian rugby at the moment in the Wallaby setup.
Yeah, and you throw in his line bending ability there. I think what you're leaning at with Frost and Williams is they're such excellent line out technicians that it almost papers over the fact that they don't have the same ability to break tackles and at least bend that defensive wall. no such issue with LSL. We saw it all through the Lions tour and his limited opportunities he really grabbed. So I think we expect to see Frost and Lucan start. And then by having Williams as your versatile bench option, you also cover six effectively and enable someone like a Pete Samu or a Carlo Tizzano to add extra impact off the bench as well if they are that secondary fetcher, or a Nick Champion de Crepney. So I think it actually gives them some versatility, having those three work in tandem. And of course, you've got the hulking shadow of Will Skelton available during Reg 9 should you decide to lean on him. So it's really exciting. And I think this is the kind of tour and the kind of opportunity that LSL not only can take, but needs to stay relevant, to stay front of mind in the 2 years leading into a World Cup.
Mm. No, I think you're 100% right on that. In the back row, it's pretty much as per. And I think that's really exciting because we have such a great second row, except for the inclusion of Pete Samu with Tom Hooper heading north. And I think how that affects the Wallabies makeup is going to be really interesting. But I think, again, Pete Samu is not a typical type of Joe Schmidt player. And that's because he plays his rugby with he's played his rugby with Bordeaux, but also what is his point of difference? It's his ability to cover all three back row positions genuinely, but also his ability to break tackles out wide. And that's what you've seen him do. It's his ability to pick a line and run it, scoring some tries from in tight, but some of his biggest highlights are definitely him in the 15-meter channels going wide, one-on-one with backs, and sometimes gassing them or sometimes just running over the top of them. And I think that that's something that Pete Samu is not a like-for-like replacement of Tom Hooper. He lacks the height. He lacks the genuine, staunch tackling ability that Tom Hooper has now. But I think that you've got a set trio with Rob Valentini, Harry Wilson at the back, and Fraser McWright. And then who you pick around that is going to be really interesting. But I think I want to get your word on this here, Lockie. Honestly, Carlo Tizzano, I'm expecting a mega shift from him on this tour. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him get at least a double of the minutes that he got in the Rugby Championship.
I'd go further and say he's a good chance to start against Japan. I think that's the kind of environment, start of a tour, keep your other fetchers hungry. Carlo has just taken every opportunity he can get. It's just so difficult with McWright there, who is, I think, they're still the clear number one choice, but Tizzano's close behind. It feels like sort of Smith, War, Pocock, Hooper all over again. It's really exciting to have that competition. So yeah, I think it's a good way to manage that back row as well and manage McWright's minutes, to have someone like Tizzano nipping at the heels. So exciting to see what kind of combinations you bring in. Now that you have a Pete Samo who is a genuine 6, 7, 8 cover and can fill those gaps, I think over a 5-test tour, we should see some rotation. It's not a case of us not wanting to put our strongest side out on the park. We know what happens when you rest. It, brought down Dave Rennie's career in 22, going down to Italy with a new look team. So I think some measured rotation, keeping at least 2 of those big 3 in the back row and moving them around and testing, giving a little bit of time to Zano, to Champion de Crepney, to Samo, just to see what they can bring in the starting jersey. I think of all the areas that we're going to go through in this squad, back row is the best served by far.
Depth wise, absolutely, absolutely. You're definitely right on that. 2 things I want to raise. Number one, I am actually now less sure that McWright is light years ahead of Chisano than I was at the start of the Rugby Championship. McWright has got a lot of on-ball steals and he's been doing really well, but he is nowhere near in comparison in the impact that someone like Artie Sevilla is making at the moment. And I know that Artie Sevilla is a very high bar, but we've got to start looking at Fraser McWright as needing to be that kind of player for us. And I think he's often spoken with that kind of wow factor in Australian circles, as in like he is one of our best players on the field day in, day out. And I think what Fraser McWright, the 3 things that Fraser McWright has in his corner when people talk about him is his ball pilfering ability, his ability to link up with Harry Wilson, and also his support play. We haven't seen two of those things. We haven't seen the support play, and we haven't seen him linking with Harry Wilson. He's been making a lot of tackles, but we know that Carlo Tizzano had the best tackling percentage of any player really in Super Rugby Pacific. And we know that he doesn't miss many at all. And even when he's been playing for the Wallabies, I think the two that he played in back to back, and I can't remember which they were, I think he made 18 from 18. So he's not missing tackles. But then we are not seeing anything from Fraser McReight with ball in hand anymore. That is something that's really disappeared out of his game. And I think, casting my mind back even to the World Cup, even to last year, we saw so much more of Fraser McReight with ball in hand. But we are lacking his contribution with ball in hand in attack. And I tell you what, Carlo Tizzano, being the highest scoring forward in Super Rugby Pacific, you are definitely going to get someone who brings something on either side of the ball. Not as good as Pilferer as Fraser McReight. It's actually, I think he pipped him by about 8 steals, something like that. But during the competition, I think it might have been a bit more. But I think genuinely what makes Fraser McReight different, or the things that say that people, the things that people talk about that make him better, we haven't seen as much of those three core skills that I mentioned earlier as we have in previous seasons. What do you reckon? What do you reckon about that, Lockie?
I think you're pretty close to being on the money there, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that. Well, I'm certainly not suggesting that McReight is streets ahead of Tizzano. I think that gap is nice and close, but like stylistically, they're different players as well. Tizzano is he's a more compact player. He's more physical. He likes the tough stuff, and that's certainly a not knock on McReight saying that he shirks away from it. But his best work with ball in hand is done wider in the wider channels. So I think you're right. We have missed a little bit of McReight's ball running, and I think this too is certainly an opportunity because typically you are afforded a little bit more time against the Northern Hemisphere nations and a bit more attack shape than you are against that intense press of South Africa, and certainly New Zealand and Argentina were able to keep him relatively contained. You take away that combination with Gordon largely used in the 9 jersey and McDermott being used sparingly off the bench in a variety of positions. So I think that's had an impact on McReight's ability to sort of freewheel a bit more as well. But like I mentioned before, you want both of them thinking that they're number one and wanting that they're number one. That competition is so healthy. It's far from bad to have two players in Wallaby Gold ripping into each other and wanting desperately to stay ahead. I think we actually need more of that across every position. I would love to see, 2 or 3 players each chomping at the bit, scrapping to get there. I'm sure it's happening behind closed doors, but it adds so much to the Wallaby jersey and what it means to pull it on. So I think the 7's going to be a fascinating one, throwing the fact that Pete Samu can pinch hit there, and you've got some really good depth to test over 5 games against the North.
Yeah, and just on that, I do want to bring this back to style. Like you mentioned the word stylistically, and that's how Fraser McReight and Tizzano differ. And a couple of weeks back when Pete Samu first came back into the fold, I made a video about it, about his signing at the Waratahs and then his picking up in the Wallabies squad. And then I had a back and forth with someone in the comments of one of my videos. And I just wanted to highlight just how stylistically different Pete Samu has been playing and is playing compared to what Joe Schmidt has been playing. So um, in the attacking stats, Samu made the least carries, was third from 6 for dominant carries, first for gain lines, second for committing tackles. And that was looking across the likes, if we compare Samu with Tom Hooper, uh, Harry Wilson, Fraser McReight, Rob Valentini, and Langy Gleeson. So let me just reiterate that. He made the least carries out of those players across the most amount of games, because we know that the French top 14 played the most amount of games. He was third for dominant carries. He was first for making the gain line. So he makes the gain line very effectively. He was second for committing 2 plus tacklers. And then if we go through what that actually means. So sorry, let me just get this up here. So his gain line stats are elite, as I noted. He was the first by far, but he has the second highest tackle evasion stats at 17.4%. So that's because he often carries in wider channels compared with that of Hooper, Valentini, and Wilson. And as McReight, who are all around 10% and as low as 4.5%. So he has more than 10% on some of these guys for tackle evasion. Gleason was up there with him, but the game plan of Bordeaux compared with other players, with other teams, and particularly the Wallabies, who we know play very direct. Joe Schmidt, you often say you can throw a blanket over the Wallabies when they're attacking. They're so narrow and they're just going north-south all the time. So Bordeaux is in the top 10 teams in the URC, the Prem, the top 14, and Super Rugby for tackle evasion, and third in those comps total for line breaks, as they are the side that plays with the ninth most out of all those teams in those comps. So that's like 50 teams. Like they play wide so often. So there is no wonder why that suits Pete Samu, because that's where Pete Samu played. Well, that's what he played like in Australia for the Wallabies and for the Brumbies, but they are in the bottom third for playing tight and close, which is what the Wallabies do a lot. So the bottom third out of all those teams, with the ninth top in width. And I just think that demonstrates how much stylistically Pete Samu is going to have to adjust and where his impact comes from. So I don't think you can look at his Bordeaux highlights and say that that's going to translate to Waratahs or Wallabies. He's undoubtedly a good player. He's done it in Wallabies colours, but I just think that we need to be wary that stylistically, Joe Schmidt has one, and he's got to be able to fit the players in and around that. So I think that's where I'll leave that example, but I do think that's food for thought for a lot of people about how they view him. Moving on into the back line, the centres, Hamish Stewart, Hunter Paisami, Joseph Akuso Suali'i, Josh Fluke. It doesn't particularly fill me with a whole bunch of punch, wow, and X factor outside of Hunter Paisami and Joseph Akuso Suali'i. How are you feeling about it?
Oh, 2 from 4 ain't bad. I think you've got a good bit of experience there, at least with Hunter in the mix. But he is far and away the most experienced at Test level out of that quartet. So Hamish Stewart to me feels like the outlier. No existing combinations with those players and an out and out 12. Whereas the other three have versatility either across the midfield or playing in the outside channel as well. So I'd expect that we see more of Fluke than Stewart. But that Paisami Suali'i combination against Argentina had so much promise. They just couldn't keep the ball in hand. And Paisami is guilty of probably throwing a couple too many when he didn't need to. But geez, he bust the line. He had a
Yeah.
really good game aside from some slippery fingers at key moments. So I'm quite excited to see him get a crack at least in the first 2 weeks. And as much as I love Len Ikitau's play and know how dependent the Wallabies' success is on his performance, we need a genuine backup. We
Yep.
need Paisami to get more minutes as well to generate that depth. So I'm picking a huge tour from him. And then really, without a Hitau, you kind of expect that we'll see Suali'i kept in that 13 channel, despite potentially what others may wish to see.
Yeah, and I think without Ikitau in the side, we'll definitely see Suali'i stay there. Whether when when Ikitau does come back, whether we see Suali'i swim out wider with Ikitau finally being returned to his preferred 13 position with Hunter Paisami staying at 12. I think the Hunter Paisami Carter Gordon combination access, if that gets going, if that gets any minutes, that is a whole bunch of ball playing potential with two guys who are not going to shirk the defense in close. And that's really going to help Joseph Akuso Suali'i, because Hunter Paisami is a much bigger talker than Lenny Kitau. We know that for a fact. We've heard it from all around the traps, in squad, out squad. Hunter Paisami is an organizer and a talker, and he's absolutely willing to step into that second ball playing element and position. So that's going to be really exciting to see how that unfolds. And I actually can't wait. I think I agree with you. Hamish Stewart, a bit of an outlier, but nonetheless, he is quite experienced and can step into the 10 jersey as well. So that's going to be interesting to see how he's used there. Although, like with Kalani Thomas, I can't see the Fluke and Stewart will get a whole lot of game time with the ability of James O'Connor and Lenny Kitau being able to come in throughout the tour. And then in the backs, we welcome back one of our favorite sons, one of the boys, Dylan Peach, back from an absolutely horror jaw injury. Corey Toole has been retained on one wing. We've also got Max Jorgensen. Andrew Kellaway makes his return from a calf strain. It's looking good, isn't it? I like the look of this back three, but I tell you what, we lack another genuine 15 option, because I'm sorry, but Max Jorgensen is just not quite ready for that jump at test level, and I think we've seen that. So Andrew Kellaway, great to have him there. it would have been nice to be able to have another option. And that's even where I think you would consider someone like Ben Donaldson, who has played there quite a fair bit at Super Rugby, and he has had a couple of games there for the Wallabies. And I just think that's lacking there because I don't want to see a stellar Max Jorgensen on the wing being taken out of that position again.
Completely agree. I think Jorgo's got a couple more years to cook on the wing before we consider moving what is such an effective player in that position. Right? It's not a case of that he can't play fullback. He's just doing so well on the wing, and why change a good thing?
Exactly.
Kellaway, you're out and out option there. Behind him, I think it probably then does become Jorgo. So expect plenty of big minutes from Kells at the back there, who's been super solid. But Peach is such a great in as well. The hustle that he brings and that he showed through that third Lions test was just brilliant. All ticker. He's just all ticker, a huge engine. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure you've preached to your followers too, but yeah, having a sevens background and having a background as a forward as well makes him a really interesting threat on ball out wide and just defensively. So great to have Peachy back in the mix. That was some gnarly jaw injury. There was a
Oh,
photo
it's
going
terrible.
around that proper saw the teeth,
Oh,
separated
it's
in that bottom
horrible.
section. It was grim stuff. So great to have him back. Great to have Harry Potter back too in that mix there. He's the
Thank
other
you. I
man
was going
that
to say
sort
Harry
of
Potter and Philippa
dropped
Dangun. I
aside.
apologize.
No, no, no. And they're exciting options because they're all three of them are really physical. We talk about Jorgensen, we talk about Tool and the pace and the skill, but each of Dalgunu, Potter, and Peach are big bodies who love to carry hard, who love to run straight. And I think it lends itself to a pretty exciting first up matchup against the Japanese, who are so skillful, but on the smaller side, on the nippier side. So maybe do we match it, or do we bring in some physical beasts like your Peaches and your Potters? It's I can't come soon enough. We're in this weird sports lull at the moment, and I'm begging for a bit more test match footy.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I am begging for more footy. And now that we've had a little bit of a hiatus, I'm ready to go again. Looking at that back three, I need to see Max Jorgensen on a wing. I need to see Andrew Kellaway a fullback. And then we can kind of work around there. Do you put a Filippo Dangunu in the 23 jersey with a Dylan Peach, provided that he passes his fitness test on Wednesday, apparently, which is that happening this week. So we're recording Tuesday night, maybe coming out. It's be coming out Wednesday morning. That's how that's going to fly. Um, yeah, it's going to be really interesting how that duel for that other position because Max Jorgensen's got that one wing locked away. He's just too good to ignore on one wing, and it just depends who you want to bring out. But I think also that really brings out the stylistic kind of player that you want. And I think with a Carter Gordon and with a Hunter Paisami, I think the quicker wingers will get more space, and so I think that'll lend themselves to that. But I think a Dylan Peach has been so good when he hasn't been looking like Bane because there was one where he had like a bunch of metal in his mouth, like clamp his jaw shut. Um, when he's not looking like Bane, he has been absolutely in stellar form. So I can't wait to see Dylan Peach back on the circuit. Absolutely. I think we'll go straight to Australia A now. So let's get into that.
Let's go.
So Australia A, we'll whip up the team there. Who do you like in here? We won't go as in detailed as this because we will do a full team review when we get the teams going up to play each other against Japan 15. Australia A, what I am seeing here off the bat is there is actually a lot of experience and there's a lot of good good options in the forwards. The back line is on the smaller, more skillful IQ side of things. That's how I wrap it around. And the propping stocks also kind of worry me. But overall, quite a cool looking squad. That's my summary before we get into the nitty gritty of it. What was your take of it?
I love Australia A as a concept. I think it's so great that we get to see the next crop that are put a pressure on the Wallabies, and it's not just their new faces; it's the 10 capped Wallabies in the mix there, like Sarah Uru, Darcy Swain, Matt Phillip, Luke Reimer. These are all forwards with ambition, with points to prove. You've got Canham and Fazler going up into the Wallabies afterwards, but for me up front, I'm so excited by Tavita Awatini. He's young prop out of the Brumbies. I'm pretty sure he's with your mob at Warringah as well.
Ratties.
And a couple of years with the Aussie under 20s, and he's a superb talent coming through the ranks as well. So to expose young players in a controlled environment to international standard rugby is really cool, particularly when you're on that pathway out of 20s. I think it's such a crucial stepping stone across men's and women's rugby to have an A program. So super excited that it's back, and particularly for those players in the front row that you mentioned, it is a relatively sort of new look group. You know, not many people are referring to an Ethan Dobbins or a Liam Bowen, but for them to have that opportunity is super exciting, and they are well supported by having a couple of existing Wallabies. The back line fascinates me though. You mentioned sort of small and skillful. There, I can't see a single big body in there outside of Joey Walton. It is really nippy.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's lightweight. That's a lightweight backline. I don't know if you have mail on this, but someone like a David Feliuai is the clear choice in here, and I know that Joe Schmidt likes him, so I don't actually know if he's injured or not, but I feel like a clear choice. Even 12 months ago, he was in and around the Wallaby squad. So, do you know anything about that?
Not sure yet. I know he had to take some personal leave a while back, but as far as injury concerns, I haven't had a recent update. He's certainly someone that's been around the test frame for such a long time. He
Mm,
played a couple of games of Super Rugby Oz as well.
yep.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's a chance to have a look at some new quantities, but some of the names like Ollie Sapsford has been around the Australia A system for a long time now.
Yep.
A similar situation there for a very known quantity in Ben Donaldson. So I don't quite understand the mix, but I like it.
Mm,
You know, seeing players like Sid Harvey be rewarded for really good sevens and Super Rugby Oz form is great. I think it's a similar situation there for Teddy Wilson for some consistent
mhm.
Super Rugby Pacific and Oz performances. And I'm stoked to see Matt Greeley in the mix too. You know what a year he's had.
Yeah, no, Mac really, I think, is the pick of the bunch from that back line. Uh, I'm I just like the way that he approaches his rugby, a bit shorter, but I tell you what, he's not scared to go up for the ball. He's quite decent in the air actually, and he can go, and he's got a couple of jet shoes, and he's someone that I can see if we were desperate. I would be more comfortable with putting him at fullback since he's been playing fullback now for like the full year, as opposed to a Max Jorgensen, because it just allows that retention of, if we start getting to our third and fourth string, we're losing wingers and etc. He's someone that I would find exciting because the players that we are putting in aren't particularly experienced anyway. Like Corey Toole, not particularly experienced. Harry Potter is experienced in clubland, not a test level, and so it's just interesting to see where we're pulling stocks from. And I think fullback, you want someone who actually plays fullback to be able to slot in there. And I think that I'm not saying that I think he should be there. I'm just saying that should the injuries come knocking on the Wallabies, which I hope they don't, that's someone that I'd look to take along with Ben Donaldson as well, because we know who can play that position as well. What's really interesting to note is the Brumbies' dominance in this forward pack. Tavita Alatini, Liam Boron, where else are we at here? Lincoln Yelly, Luke Reimer, Pete Samu was you could almost call him a Brumby just because that's where he's played all his rugby until he hasn't even played a game for the Waratahs, I don't believe. And then you've got Darcy Swain, former Brumby as well, Rory Scott and Reese Van Neck. Obviously, Darcy Swain's at the force at the moment, but particularly for the propping stocks. That is a huge nod to John Alugia, to Dan Palmer, who was there previously working with the academy system before he headed north and then now back to the Waratahs. And I just think that out of all these players, you're looking at someone like a Tom Lambert missing out is huge because he was touted to be a very talented player coming up. You're looking at Blake Chop, you're looking at Harry Johnson Holmes. These are the kind of players that are in that older bracket that aren't at full health at the minute that we're missing out on at the moment. So a lot of young guns there. Yeah, any comment that you want on the pack there? Because obviously Isaac Aino Kalia is trying to make his way back into the Wallabies after being such a mainstay last year. But now there's so much promise in this group, but yet I just feel like there's still a bit of a step down, you know?
It's funny because it just looks as if you've pulled out a Brumbies forward pack from Super Rugby Oz and said, "Oh, we'll just take you and go," and it's for good reason. Linton Yelly, was one that we sort of skipped over at the start of this chat, but what an amazing performance he had for the First Nations Pacifica as well. And
Yeah.
his star has really risen through Super Rugby Oz and the back end of the Pacific season as well, in the absence of Alan Alatoa and James Slipper in part. So super excited to see what he can bring there as well. I think in the case of those Harry Johnson Holmes and Blake Shops, there's been so many injuries and so many setbacks through this period as well that, similar to Tom Liner, it's a case of managing, allowing them to reset and heal and go again. For some people, a one-off game in Japan against XV just isn't worth it. But for others, like Linton Yelly, what a huge opportunity for Tavita Alatini for those players. And this game's all about opportunity, right? Yeah, yes, there's the development aspect, but players like Ben Donaldson or Matt Greeley, they could play themselves onto the spring tour because of that sort of lack of depth in the fly half for Dono, but also across fullback in general. There is so much more on the line than I think people really see when it comes to this fixture. And it's this weekend. Like, this isn't something far flung away.
Yeah.
We're only a couple of days out from seeing someone pull on Aussie gold again. And that's just super exciting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely cannot wait. So before we move on, tell me who you would have liked to have seen this Aussie squad, because I know that I have some thoughts, but you tell me where are we missing? Where are we missing the players that deserve to be
Max Bury, next question.
here? All right, you're gonna have to give me a little bit more on that. I agree, but you're gonna have to give me a bit more than that.
No, that's a bit too short and sharp. For those who watched Super Rugby Oz, they would have seen the former Sevens star Max Bury, or star's probably a bit strong, but he was part of the program, and a successful product out of Norths in the Shoot Shield. He's been at the Force for a couple of years now, sitting behind Ben Donaldson. There's been the emergence of Alex Harford at the Force that sort of bumped him back a little bit, but Max Bury is I think 25 or 26-year-old playmaker who just was untouchable for the Western Force in their run to the Super Rugby Oz final. Some of the stuff he was doing was jaw-dropping, honestly. I don't think anyone's outside of that North's bubble might have seen it coming, the extent to which he dominated a competition, but he was phenomenal. And an experienced playmaker is something that the Wallabies aren't necessarily going to throw straight to the Wolves, but would have been really useful on an Aussie A tour with the stocks that have been given being Ben Donaldson and Harry McLaughlin-Phillips. So I was gobsmacked not to see Max Bury in the mix there. And really, it's Bury first and Daylight second as far as standout performers who didn't get a look in for me. Do you agree, or am I just yelling at clouds here?
No, I wholeheartedly agree that Max Bury should be on this tour, purely because I do genuinely feel that he should be in a genuine duel with Ben Donaldson at the Force to start at 10 next Super Rugby season for 2026. He is a player that has the running game of Donaldson. There's not much that splits those guys in a sprint and an explosivity aspect, and he can play 15 as well, and did a lot for the Force whenever they couldn't split those two on the field. So it was Ben Donaldson at 10, Bury at 15. And I just feel like we should lift someone up like that who can take a Super Rugby Oz competition so comfortably in their stride, as you mentioned. So I feel that he can go ahead and start doing that at Super Rugby level if he's given that trust by Simon Cron. And both of them having been at Norths before, I think that Simon Cron should really put some thought behind that, as well as the fact that Simon Cron is the coach for this Auss side. So that's really interesting, the fact that he's not, that Max Bury isn't there. And I know that Simon Cron wasn't the coach for the Force during this Super Rugby Auss competition, but nonetheless, that's his club. That's who he oversees. He's the head honcho there. So would have liked to have seen him. The other player that I think that really should be there, and which is why, because in the second row, you're only really running Darcy Swain here, Matt Phillip, and Josh Canham. And of course, you can have Sarah Uru, who played a fair bit of that during Super Rugby Oz as well. But Miles Amatosero is looking like more and more of a Super Rugby level lock. And his grunt in carrying the ball, his aggression in defense, very, very, very promising from a young bloke who's only 23, 24 years old, who's got genuinely massive raw dimensions. And I thought from what I saw at him at Super Rugby Oz level, he was one of the best locks. And I tell you what, you and I had a discussion a while back when we talked about who's an offensive player and a defensive player. Darcy Swain is a very much a defensive player with a set piece orientated mindset. He's not a particularly athletic bloke like a Josh Canham, but Miles Amatosero ran at Darcy Swain on several occasions in that Super Rugby Oz final, and Miles Amatosero came out on top every time. There was not once that Darcy Swain won that duel. So I think that from a person who's a defensive oriented player losing to Amatosero in that one-on-one, because Darcy Swain is not a slouch. In defense, he hurts blokes. And that was really, really impressive. So Miles Amatosero is my pick. And I think what's really interesting, I think Tim Ryan and James Hendren from the Waratahs, two sides of a coin. And it'd be very, very interesting to see those guys play up against each other, because I didn't actually watch the whole thing of the Reds Waratahs game, and I'm not sure they were playing in that game. But James Hendren outpaced Tim Ryan for a runaway try. I've seen that highlight. And so it's very, very interesting that James Hendren isn't getting a look in. I know that Tim Ryan has done stuff at Super Rugby level that James Hendren hasn't even played yet, the proper competition. But tell you what, James Hendren and Tim Ryan, they could be brothers, because the way that they play and their running style, very similar.
Yeah, Hendren's a huge prospect, and I think it's not so much incumbency, but he is so raw. And yeah, you could consider taking him, but I think you actually get more out of seeing Tim Ryan against an international opponent than throwing James Hendren in there without a particular direction. So I'm sure that for the Australia A squad, it's not just Simon Cron picking and choosing whoever he wants. This would be a full lump in with RA's high performance unit, and Tim Ryan's been floating around that Australia A Wallabies radar for a little while now. So makes sense to me. I was surprised that they didn't actually consider someone like a Clem Halaholo as well through the as a back row and second row option. He was really good. I thought he was really good for the Tars
Monstrous,
actually.
monstrous
And
bloke.
yeah, big lad, big impact at set piece, both sides of the ball. Again, sort of on the fringes. I'm not sure how many super caps, if any, he has, but in this tournament past, he was
Mm,
excellent. Maybe a similar case to Hendren, as in, new
mm,
quantity. We don't know what we can do against an international opponent. Someone who started against an international opponent and kept that through Super Rugby Oz that hasn't been considered, Jarrah McLeod.
mm,
Out of a really tough Brumbies run, I thought
mm,
Jarrah was phenomenal across
mm,
the whole Super Rugby Oz, coming off that amazing game for First Nations Pacifica. He still wraps up with a double against the Tars and had a wonderful season. So having a centre like that, yes, you've got Sapsford and you've got Walton, you've got a few other options there, but I would have thought they'd really like to keep his progression
mm.
moving after what's been a massive 6 months for that young man.
Mm. No, it's a good point. But I think, as you mentioned earlier, high performance aspect, they've made all the right choices. Tim Ryan, miles ahead of James Hendren, as comes from a development perspective and experience perspective. Jarrah McLeod doesn't really come anywhere close. Hamish Stewart, Joey Walton, or Ollie Sapsford in the centres from an experienced perspective or versatility perspective, really, in some of those instances. Now, let's just have a look here. Out of the players that aren't playing in the Wallaby, so that's Matt Fesler, Josh Hannum, and Hamish Stewart and Pete Samu, who here out of this bunch, one back, one forward, do you think really, really could be pushing for a Wallaby spot? I'm gonna pop off really quickly, and I'm gonna say that I think that Isaac Aito Kailea and Seru Uru, those are the two that, because you want to be able to get that experience in propping stocks should there be some injury, and Isaac Kalia has played there before. And I think Seru Uru is very much a similar player to what Tom Hooper can bring from a versatility perspective in the forwards. He can play back row and second row, and he's quite experienced. I think he actually showed a bit more abrasiveness in Super Rugby Oz. So I think that's from the forwards where I think that they can, those kind of players should really, I could really be looking at to go up another level.
Yeah, it's a huge game for Seru, right? Sort of the forgotten man after getting a couple of test caps here and there through 24. A
Mm,
few big performances against the Lions as well from Seru, kind
absolutely.
of overshadowed by Luke Khan's efforts, but another
Mm,
player who would be desperate to get back in the mix there. I think so much is on the line for him. But I can't go past Ben Donaldson, the man not included in that Australia squad. as a part of that contingent that plays Aussie and then goes with. He can book himself on a flight with a huge performance. It's just it still boggles me that he hasn't been picked. And yes, we know he's struggled with form, and we outlined his history in the jersey and his ability to turn games at both super and international level. But that's a genuine 10-15 option that you've decided, no, we don't need you at this stage for Wallabies. He must be stinging. So I think we can expect plenty of feeling in a performance from him against Japan 15 this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there are other players that you could talk about there, like Ollie Sapsford, from a diversity perspective or versatility perspective, and Matt Greeley as well that we mentioned before. But I think that the right call is the one that you've made there on Ben Donaldson. Absolutely. Um, it's really exciting. I think if you and I get together later in the week and do a little bit of a preview for when the site's actually announced, then we can get a little bit more into the actual players. But I think that's what we'll park the Oz A chat for the minute. But Lockie, that is all you and I are going to be talking about. That's all we have time for. We're going to come back with an episode later in the week, previewing Australia A. Finally, some rugby back. Lockie, it is so good to see your gorgeous mulleted head once again. It's been too long, friend. It's been way too long. And I hope that you've enjoyed chatting as well, because I think you have, because we've just been absolutely yapping our ears off here. It's been ridiculous. Like, someone shut us up.
It's a gas bag. Let's pull the plug here, mate. Always a pleasure. I'll catch you soon for a preview.
Take it easy to all you guys who enjoy your rugby. Keep your eyes on the Twitter, on the Instagram at Scrumbags, where Lockie does his brilliant work, their podcast as well. And then make sure that you keep your eye out on the Wallabies and, the Australian A news approaching this game one on October 8 at 3 p.m. our time, I believe. That's Australian Eastern Standard Daylight Time, not for you guys in Queensland and elsewhere in the country, because we run off freaking different times at this time of the year, which is annoying as hell. But you'll get the point. You look it up online. It's going to be all good. Until all you guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you so much for getting to this point in the pod. Lockie, peace to you. Everyone else, ciao.